They said human civilization started simple. Small villages, short lives, nothing advanced. But the Sumerian King List laughs at that idea. It claims ancient rulers lived for thousands of years. It lists cities no one can find. And it talks about a world before a massive flood wiped out everything. If this clay tablet is telling even a slice of the truth, then human history might be completely upside down. For years, this strange list sat quietly in museum cases, just another artifact from ancient Mesopotamia. But the deeper researchers dig, the stranger the story becomes. It's not just a list of kings. It's a record that seems to mix real history with impossible details. And somehow, the more impossible it sounds, the more evidence seems to appear. Today, we're breaking down how one clay tablet might force us to rethink everything we thought we knew about the rise of humans, cities, and the very idea of civilization itself. Here's the real challenge. How do you explain a document that mixes verifiable rulers with kings who supposedly reigned for 36,000 years? How do you deal with a timeline that talks about cities rising and falling long before archaeology says they existed? And what do you do when one ancient tablet lines up almost too perfectly with myths from across the world? The Sumerian King List doesn't behave like a normal historical record. It behaves like something else. Part memory, part myth, part political propaganda, and maybe something far older than anyone expected. That's the puzzle. And solving it means looking at history without the comfort of the official version. We start with what we know about Sumer. Around 4,500 BCE, small farming villages grew into the first major cities: Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Kish. These weren't just towns. They had temples, complex irrigation, writing, law systems, trade networks stretching for thousands of kilometers. This alone makes Sumer one of the oldest large-scale civilizations we know. But the King List tells a story that stretches far beyond that neat timeline. The tablet that shouldn't exist. When the first versions were found in the early 1900s, scholars expected a boring administrative record. Instead, they stared at lines like, "After kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." That alone raises questions. Why would the earliest civilization say kingship descended from somewhere? Why describe leadership as something handed down rather than developed? But then it gets stranger. The first king, Alulim, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, 36,000 years. Others ruled for 43,200 or even 64,800 years. These numbers don't fit human biology. They don't fit archaeology. They don't fit logic. Yet they appear on multiple tablets from different cities, across different centuries. Someone kept copying them. Someone thought it mattered. This is the first moment where the King List forces you to stop and ask, were these numbers symbolic, exaggerated, or memories from a time before recorded history? The flood line that mirrors global myths. Right in the middle of the tablet, the tone shifts. Then the flood swept over the land. After this line, all the king's lifespans suddenly drop from tens of thousands of years to hundreds. It's like the tablet is saying the world was reset. Every major culture has a flood story: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, India, China, Native American tribes, Pacific Islanders. Different places, same idea. A massive flood wipes out an earlier age. And here's the strange part. Geology shows there were multiple massive flood events at the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose by more than 100 meters in a short span. So now we have a clay tablet from 4,000 years ago, describing something that geology and worldwide myths also describe. Coincidence? Maybe. But how many coincidences does it take before we question our assumptions? Cities that shouldn't be there. The King List talks about cities that supposedly existed way before archaeology says cities existed. One example, Eridu, which the tablet calls the first city. Archaeology once dismissed that idea, until digs revealed Eridu was indeed one of the earliest human settlements, older than Uruk. Then the list names Kish becoming the seat of kingship after the flood, and archaeology confirms Kish was one of the first major power centers after 3000 BCE. It's almost as if the king list remembers a timeline much older than our textbooks allow, but still correct about the sequence of ancient dominance. This ability to blend what is real with what seems impossible is where the mystery deepens, because either the Sumerians made a lucky guess, or they were preserving memories from a time before modern archaeology can reach. Were these supernatural lifespans code? Not everything has to be literal. Some historians believe the massive lifespans act like coded numbers. One theory says they used a number system based on 60. Another says the years represent dynastic lengths, not individual lifespans. Another claims these kings were not individual people but lineages. But here's the counterpoint. If it's symbolism, why did the scribes keep repeating it for hundreds of years? Why did different cities copy the same impossible numbers? Why did they consider it important enough to pass down again and again? Usually, propaganda changes to suit political needs. Myth changes as stories evolve. But this list stayed strangely consistent. That consistency is what keeps researchers awake at night. The pattern of lost civilizations. Here's where the story takes another turn. When you compare the king list to other early myths, Egyptian, Indian, Chinese, you get a shocking pattern. In ancient Egypt, the Zep Tepi era describes gods and semi-divine beings ruling for thousands of years before the human pharaohs. In India, the Yuga cycles talk about long ages where people lived for thousands of years. In China, early kings are said to have lived hundreds of years. Different cultures, different languages. Same idea. There was a before age, a time of impossible lifespans, advanced beings, or forgotten rulers. This doesn't mean it's literally true, but it does mean humans across the ancient world were remembering something, or trying very hard to explain something. And the question becomes, were they exaggerating? Or were they trying to describe a distant memory they didn't fully understand? The political weapon theory. Not all mysteries are cosmic. Some are human. Another angle says the king list was politics, pure and simple, a tool to show which dynasty had divine support. Imagine a new king taking power. He wants to look legitimate, so he links himself to a long line of kings stretching back to the dawn of time. That makes his rule harder to question. But even if this theory is true, it raises new questions. Why use such absurd lifespans? Why mix myth with verifiable rulers? Why mention cities that archaeology later proved real? Most propaganda has a clear purpose. The king list feels more complicated, as if it inherited stories older than the scribes themselves. The timeline that doesn't add up, or does the king list claims kingship passes from city to city in a specific order: Eridu, Bad Tibera, Larak, Sipar, Shurupak, Flood, Kish, Uruk, Ur, Adab, etc. Archaeology only confirmed this much later. So how did the scribes know? They didn't have modern excavations. They didn't have carbon dating. They didn't have satellite archaeology. And yet the sequence makes sense. It's like the king list is a blurry memory of the real flow of early power, except the beginning is stretched into impossibility. This blend of truth and myth is what makes it so dangerous to traditional history. What if the list isn't wrong, just ancient? Here's a thought that makes historians uncomfortable. What if the king list isn't lying? What if it's talking about something that existed before recorded history? A civilization wiped out by the floods of the Ice Age. A memory passed down, distorted but not fully lost. Humans have existed for hundreds of thousands of years. But our written history covers just the last 5,000. That leaves a massive blank space. A space where entire cultures could have risen and fallen, leaving almost nothing behind. And when sea levels rose, any coastal civilization would be underwater now. So the king list might be strange because it's describing a world we no longer have access to. A world drowned, erased, forgotten. Here's the moment everything snaps into focus. The king list isn't trying to tell us a simple timeline. It's trying to tell us that history is not linear. It resets. It collapses. It rises again. And the flood line, right at the middle of the tablet, acts like a giant divider, separating one age from another. A reset button in human memory. After the flood, lifespans shrink. Cities change. Kingship moves. Everything restarts. It's almost as if the Sumerians believed they were living in a world rebuilt on the ruins of something much older. And here's the twist. Modern science agrees that something massive disrupted the world at the end of the Ice Age. Sudden climate shifts, mega floods, drowned coastlines, lost migration patterns, different tools, different language, same event. When you line it all up, the King List stops looking insane and starts looking like a story written by people who were remembering the end of the world. So what does the King List really reveal? It shows us that history is messy. It's layered. It's full of things we haven't explained yet. The Sumerians weren't telling a simple story. They were preserving fragments. Some real, some exaggerated, some inherited from a forgotten time. And somehow, thousands of years later, parts of their story match things we're still uncovering. Whether the long lifespans were symbolic, or memories of a pre-flood civilization, or political exaggerations. The King List forces us to question our assumptions about how old civilization truly is. Maybe humans have been building, collapsing, rebuilding, and losing their memories far longer than we think. Maybe we're not the first advanced society. Maybe we're just the latest one with a written record. Stick around, like and subscribe to our channel, and dive into the next video to uncover even more hidden history.